Hey, good morning and welcome to the Branding Laboratory. This is my first official go live on YouTube. So, a little bit excited about that. And I noticed that my normal background is not here. So, I'm going to have to fix that for the next episode. But today, I want to talk a little bit about an experience I had over the weekend last week. I returned home from a mastermind experience yesterday in Tampa, Florida. And on a private phone call this morning, the hosts of the event brought some of the leaders, some of the speakers together that had been involved in a keynote at the session, which I was one of them. And he asked a question that deserves a thoughtful answer rather than a rushed one. And I had, about a minute and a half to sort of give my take on this topic about momentum. So I wanted to sort of dive into that a little bit more. And the question was, what does momentum look like? And how do we maintain it once we sort of have a little bit of access to it or a taste of it? And for me, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about this idea because momentum for me, and it's a really interesting word, but it sits at the center for me of entrepreneurship and leadership and personal development and how we show up in the world and our brand. And it determines really from a simplistic point of view, it determines whether growth compounds, expands, evolves, or if it stalls. And it's really this kind of determination around ideas that turn into execution, or do they just sort of stall out, and whether our identity is going to evolve or just sort of remain in this theoretical state, right? So I want to unpack momentum structurally. I want to unpack it practically and examine it, if I will, because I like to go a little bit existential down this rabbit hole. I want to examine it existentially, but I want to take it from multiple angles. So neurologically, psychologically, pragmatically, if you will, energetically, because this is something that I really have been diving into lately, is this idea of energy. We're all just energy, right? And socially, how does it impact those around us, our culture, our circle, our friends, our family, etc. And my goal at the end of this podcast is to give you a framework that you can apply to your own life and your business immediately. And so the through line on this is centered around this idea of momentum is identity in motion, in movement, in energetic movement. And so that's the direction I'm going to take. So speaking of existentially, momentum really for me, it's this identification of identity in motion. And it occurs when your actions are reinforcing the person that you believe inherently yourself to be. And when identity and behavior align, right, your nervous system begins to experience this idea of coherence. And if you've watched any of my social media, you hear me talk about this idea of coherence because it's coherence, alignment, if you will, which produces our energy, our vortex, right? And people feel that, people see that when you walk into a room, how you behave whenever you're interacting with people, people feel that coherent energy or not, right? And so when you repeatedly perform something habitually, when you repeatedly act in this alignment, in this coherence with whatever it is that you live by, your values, your standards, your philosophies, your beliefs, your internal system, the things that sort of guide your life, right? Those become your North Star. Your internal system begins to stabilize. And this momentum, this forward momentum, becomes sort of like a natural way of living, right? It's like when you go to the gym, right? And I tried to explain this to somebody the other day. They were frustrated that their workout was just not sort of like having the results that they wanted. And I was like, dude, how many days have you been in the gym right now? And he's like, I've been here for a week. Your momentum in the gym only stabilizes. You're only going to start to see that growth when you have perpetuity to it. And this is more than 1 week. This is at a minimum 90 days. You're really going to start to see that the muscles are changing, the body is changing, the fat is metastasizing into muscle, right? And so it doesn't happen overnight, right? So this idea of existential movement, it has to continually happen on a regular basis. And again, like I said before, it happens when actions, habits, reinforce the person that you believe yourself to be, right? And when there is a gap between who you think you are or who you claim to be and how you behave or how you work out or how long you work out or how many times you go to the gym, etc., this friction will increase and the actual progress, your muscles getting bigger, will slow. And the funny thing about it is this friction is often it's often misinterpreted as people call it burnout, people call it fatigue, whatever you want to call it. But really, from my point of view, it's really just boils down to being straight up downright misalignment, this lack of coherence, right? And so yeah, so let me unpack that for a little bit more. Neurologically speaking, okay, so we talked about the energy side of it. Neurologically speaking, momentum, just to continue with this train of thought, is pattern reinforcement, right? So your brain and your body, it strengthens what you continually do, this habituation, right? What you repeat, right? And when you complete meaningful actions, these neural pathways, this neuroplasticity in your mind that are associated with those actions, they actually become more efficient. And there's a chemical compound called myelination, or there's a process called myelination, and I know I'm saying that wrong, but that actually increases. And what happens is the cost of repeating the behavior decreases. So another way to put that is efficiency reduces internal resistance, and over time, the behaviors that align with your identity require less effort because your brain has optimized for them. Does that make sense? So momentum, in other words, let me simplify that. Momentum is your nervous system becoming more proficient at who you repeatedly practice being, right? So if you're consistently showing up in rooms, and in the case of going to these events, like I consistently go to these mastermind events. And the reason I do them is because I want to surround myself with people that are doing amazing things in the world and have these deep and meaningful conversations with them, surround myself with their inspiration, be in their energy. And every single time I walk away with friends, I walk away with collaborations, I walk away with a new way of being. So I'm repeatedly practicing being a type of way. And my mind, my body, my energy recognizes that. All right, let's talk a little bit about psychologically. Psychologically, momentum, it takes its cue from visible progress, right? So your brain in everything we do, it requires evidence, right? And when your progress becomes concrete, it becomes measurable, the motivation inside increases because the mind perceives actual movement. So if your goals are abstract or undefined, or if you haven't visualized what it is you want to do, the mind actually struggles to register any sort of advancement, and the energy sort of dissipates, right? I know I'm getting a little bit high level here, but I'm trying to explain this psychologically. This is actually science based. Momentum actually has a science based backing. So maintaining momentum, therefore, requires defining very specific wins, tracking tangible movements, and reducing any cognitive ambiguity. And what happens is the clarity is sustained because clarity provides proof. So your body sees sustainability, it sees movement, it sees traction, and that's the proof it needs. And so it's like, okay, I kind of feel I like what's going on here. I'm gonna work with that. All right, pragmatically, analytically, momentum is strongly tied to decision speed. And I love this term, decision speed. Every unresolved decision occupies a mental bandwidth in your brain. And these open loops accumulate what I call cognitive load, right? And so as that load increases, decision fatigue follows. So if you ever see these high momentum individuals, they have these shortened, and you sort of understand like how do they get to that point? They have very short decision cycles. They narrow their focus on exactly what it is they're trying to accomplish, and they just make the decision to do it. And what they're doing is they're reducing unnecessary optionality, right? They're not caught up in this decision paralysis analysis type of thing. They commit publicly and they architect their environment around exactly what that commitment looks like, and they focus in on it. And when focus is narrowed and choices are fewer, execution accelerates. That's why you hear some of these the greatest performers, whether they're an athlete or a leader, they always talk about simplifying everything. Keep it simple, stupid. Simplify as much as possible. I talked about it yesterday on social media. I have this massive list of all these really cool things that I learned over 5 days in Tampa, Florida, with all these amazing leaders. And, how do you synthesize all that? How are you going to institute that? How are you going to implement that into your business, into your life, whatever it is? And the best way to do that for me is to synthesize all this information, simplify it down, and find, you can do this by a mind map, by the way. Mind maps are really great to sort of take a look at all the different variables, crisscross their interconnectivity, connect the variables that work, the variables that are associated with growth, with movement, whatever it is that you're looking for. And then you simplify a through line through all that. And that through line is sort of the piece that you're going to integrate into your life, right? So that's my piece on pragmatically. All right, let's talk about attention, because attention is really important. Attention plays a very decisive role. What you repeatedly think about becomes amplified within your internal landscape. That's why people do affirmations. That's why experts always recommend waking up and developing habits, making your bed, journaling, whatever it is. Pay attention to the things you're doing. Give it its just attention, because what you repeatedly think about becomes amplified within your internal landscape. And the cool thing about this attentive habituation is that it actually neurologically strengthens the neural circuits that it's rehearsing, right? And momentum requires very intentional direction of focus, and guarded inputs, controlled exposure, discipline, allocation of attention. They allow this forward motion to continue. And when attention is scattered across noise, comparison, distraction, paralysis analysis, the forward motion actually slows down, because internal energy begins to fragment. And then fragmentation leads to analysis, paralysis leads to putting it on the shelf and not doing anything with it, leads to things not getting done. You always hear me talk about start by starting. If you want to get something done, just start by starting. It doesn't have to be perfect, man. It doesn't have to be fully complete. Just get the idea that you have, whatever it is you want to do, get it into some forward movement. And the forward movement will capitulate over time. And then you can go in and you can clean things up. You can get as close to perfection as you have to, which you'll never get there, but you can clean things up and optimize. But you have to start by starting, because once you get the will in motion, think about a snowball going down a hill or a wheel going down a hill, it just gradually picks up speed, right? And once you start by starting, this momentum builds, because it's movement, it's creation, habituation, attention, discipline, right? So that's the power of getting movement going. Socially speaking, when you think about your circle, when you think about your vortex of the people that you're around, your environment, momentum is very environmental, right? It really matters the type of people that you surround yourself with. It matters the feng shui in your office. It matters the type of environment you put in. Human nervous systems calibrate to alignment and proximity, right? And so pace, posture, language, ambition, environments, they're very, very contagious. And speaking of environments, the first thing you can do to sort of get some momentum going is clean up your office. If your office is disarray and you've got shit all over the place, clean it up, man. One of the things I really focus on every morning is making my bed, keeping my room orderly, coming up into my office, organizing whatever needs to be taken care of, because I want everything to be clean and in alignment visually, so that my body can take a cue that there is momentum, that there is movement, there is clarity, there is cohesion, there is coherence. And it's really crazy, because when you do that, and you can test this out, man, just spend 1 week in a messy room, whether a messy office, and tell me how you feel after the end of that week. And then the next week, get it back to orderly and clean, so you know where everything is. You're not spending time chasing things down, but you're in a clean environment, and you'll see what that environment does for you. And these environments that you're in, again, these can be social, these can be just, the type of rooms that you're in, the type of feng shui that exists. They accelerate or they decelerate or they dampen the movement. And so if you're in rooms or in masterminds or things like that are centered around growth, and they're reinforcing progress oriented thinking, and they're around intelligent people and all these different things, they increase you, right? That becomes your social momentum. On the converse, on the other side of that, rooms that are stagnant or who have low quality of energy, they actually compromise your inertia, right? And so it's really important to sort of be self-aware. You've heard the saying, you are a byproduct of the 6 people that you hang around with. It's really important to have some presence around who you're spending your time with. Your internal state adjusts to the dominant state of the metaphorical room that you occupy most frequently. So when you can align all of these elements, identity, we talked about behavior, we talked about neurological, reinforcement, visible progress, decisive action, all of these different things, focused attention, growth-oriented environments. When you get them in alignment, they interact in a self-reinforcing cycle. And momentum is like that snowball. It starts to become self-perpetuating because every aligned action lowers the cost of the next aligned action. And that's the whole point of being, is like lowering the cost, path of least resistance. And this is why you see some leaders, well, not some, you see a lot of people experience the sustained expansion on a regular basis, and you're always wondering why you don't. Well, it's time to take a look at sort of how you are showing up in the world and what sort of momentum you're actually generating on your own. And I don't think it's a matter of motivation. Motivation plays a part into it, right? It's really a matter of alignment between identity, structure, and these repeated behaviors. Those are what's going to ultimately drive your momentum. So if you feel like your momentum is constantly fluctuating, I invite you to examine whether your daily actions are reinforcing the identity you claim to embody, and examine whether progress is visible and measurable, and examine whether these decisions are delayed beyond any sort of necessity, and examine where your attention is directed and what environment you are actually calibrating to. Because momentum compounds when your actions, when your beliefs, and your structures converge or align. So, what's the takeaways from today? Let me sort of, if I can distill this down, because that was a bit scientific, and I know a lot of people are like, bro, can we simplify this? Momentum builds when identity and behavior align. Momentum strengthens when repeated action reinforces your neural efficiency. Momentum sustains when progress is visible and measurable. Momentum accelerates when decisions are made cleanly and focus is narrowed. Momentum stabilizes when your attention is protected and your environments, the rooms you're in, support actual growth. And when all of these elements converge, forward motion compounds naturally. So, that being said, if you are building something meaningful and you are sensing or seeing inconsistency in your forward motion, your forward movement, that inconsistency might be a clue of some sort of structural signal worth examining a little bit more deliberately. And I think a lot of people I know, a lot of people I interact with, they try to solve momentum by increasing their activity, working harder, adding more things to their plate, showing up more often. And that's not the case, because the more powerful move is to focus on your identity, your structure, your execution, the rooms you're in, so that progress becomes coherent, not just sort of like this performative, episodic, repeatable thing that's just kind of denigrating your life. So that's what I do. So my work actually centers around helping founders and operators and leaders align who they are, align who they are becoming with how their business is structured and executed, and help their decision making be more coherent, more in alignment, more efficient. And what happens is, when that alignment, that coherence is more precise, the momentum that you're building, like that snowball picking up speed down the mountainside, it compounds, and you start to see this in the relationships you're building, in the revenue that you're building, in the culture that you're building, the decision making, that you are much more efficient and no longer getting caught up in this sort of like over analysis paralysis state like I used to be in many years ago. And if you want to examine this, my contact information is below, not to be salesy or call to action, but these are the things that I do. I have private diagnostic one-on-ones that I can help you understand what's actually going on in this space, and then get to the root of the problem and develop a rubric, a blueprint, a plan to get more focused, more strategic, and more clarified on what it is you're trying to do in this next phase of growth. And then sort of utilize this idea that momentum is engineered alignment that you sustain over time. It does not happen by accident. You have to really focus on it. So that's what momentum is to me. I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any questions, please like, share, comment, whatever you do with the YouTube channel. If you know somebody who could benefit from this conversation, please share it. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them below. If you have any topics that you would like to hear me break down next week, I'm going to start showing up in these solo episodes At the very least, my promise to you is once a week, I'm going to be here on YouTube Live doing what I think are important vehicles for us as individuals, whether we're building our life or our business or our relationships, to sort of reflect on and build upon and sort of have self-awareness around, because we truly are the only ones that are responsible for the course and the trajectory of our life, and we always have a choice in how we respond to everything that is thrown at us. So I hope that's helpful for you. I'm Devo, host of the Branding Laboratory. I will see you next week in the lab. Peace.